In the chaos of World War II, two German battleships achieved the impossible. They sank a British aircraft carrier in open combat, a feat never repeated. They were fast, they were deadly, and they were a constant, nagging terror in the minds of the British Admiralty. The more famous of the pair, the Scharnhorst, would meet a valiant end in the frozen darkness of the North Cape. But her sister, a ship that was in many ways her equal, would suffer a far crueler and more agonizing fate. This is the story of a warship that lived a lifetime of action in just a few short years. A vessel that successfully raided the Atlantic and made a mockery of the Royal Navy in their own backyard, only to be struck down not in a blaze of glory at sea, but by a single, catastrophic blow while helpless in port. This is the story of the German battleship Gneisenau. To understand the Gneisenau, you first have to understand the Germany that built her. The nation was still bound by the chains of the Treaty of Versailles, which had crippled its armed forces after World War I. The German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, was a shadow of the former High Seas Fleet. Their first attempt to push the boundaries of the treaty resulted in the Deutschland-class armored ships, famously nicknamed pocket battleships by the British. They were clever designs, but they were not true capital ships. By the mid-1930s, with Adolf Hitler in power and the political landscape of Europe darkening, Germany was ready to take its next defiant step. The catalyst was the Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935, a controversial pact where Britain, hoping to avoid a naval arms race, essentially gave Germany permission to build a fleet up to 35% of the strength of the Royal Navy. This agreement opened the door for a new class of warship, one that would be a quantum leap beyond the pocket battleships. These would be Germany's first true capital ships since the Great War. Two were laid down, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. The Gneisenau's keel was laid at the Deutsche Werke shipyard in Kiel on May 6, 1935. From the very beginning, these ships were a source of debate. Were they battleships or battlecruisers? The British, looking at their formidable armor protection, called them battleships. The Germans themselves classified them as Schlachtschiffe, or battleships. Yet, they possessed the one trait that defined the classic battlecruiser: blistering speed. The design was a masterclass in balancing the classic triangle of firepower, protection, and speed. For protection, Gneisenau was shielded by a main armor belt that was 350 millimeters, 13.8 inches thick, comparable to many foreign battleships. Her armored deck was designed to withstand plunging fire from long-range gunnery and bombs. For speed, she was fitted with a trio of Brown, Bovary & Company geared steam turbines, fed by 12 ultra-high-pressure oil-fired boilers. This advanced but notoriously complex power plant could generate over 160,000 shaft horsepower, pushing the nearly 35,000-ton vessel to a top speed of over 31 knots. That's over 57 kilometers per hour, or 36 miles per hour. This speed made her faster than any battleship in the Royal Navy, allowing her to choose her fights and outrun anything she couldn't outgun. But it was her armament, her firepower, that was the most controversial aspect of her design. Instead of the 38-centimeter, 15-inch guns that were becoming the standard for new European battleships, Gneisenau was equipped with 9 28.3-centimeter, 11-inch guns arranged in 3 triple turrets. This was a significant compromise. While these guns had a high rate of fire and an excellent range, they lacked the shell weight and raw hitting power of their larger counterparts. The decision was a pragmatic one. Germany had experience with this caliber, the guns were readily available, and fitting them would get the ships into service much faster, at a time when war seemed increasingly likely. Crucially, however, the designers planned for the future. The turrets, designated DOC-HC-34, were brilliantly engineered to be large enough to accommodate twin 38-centimeter gun turrets, with minimal modification down the line. It was a promise of future power, a promise that would haunt the Gneisenau for her entire career. Her secondary armament was a powerful mix of 12 15-centimeter, 5.9-inch guns in single and twin mounts, and an anti-aircraft suite of 14 10.5-centimeter, 4.1-inch heavy cannons, along with numerous smaller automatic cannons. After 2 years of construction, the massive gray hull slid into the water on December 8, 1936. Over the next 18 months, she was fitted out, her guns were installed, and her complex machinery was put to the test. Finally, on May 21, 1938, she was commissioned into the Kriegsmarine, a potent symbol of Germany's resurgent naval power. But her early service was plagued by the very feature that gave her such great speed. The high-pressure steam plant was temperamental and prone to issues. Furthermore, she demonstrated a tendency to ship a large amount of water over the bow in heavy seas, a flaw that led to her being fitted with a new, raised Atlantic bow in early 1939. These were the teething problems of a new warship, and time to fix them was running out. When war broke out in September 1939, Gneisenau and her sister Scharnhorst represented the core of Germany's surface fighting power. In late November, the two ships sortied into the passage between Iceland and the Faroe Islands, tasked with drawing out British naval units. Here, they found their first victim, the British armed merchant cruiser HMS Rawalpindi. The former passenger liner stood no chance. Despite being hopelessly outgunned, her captain gallantly chose to fight. The German battleship's guns roared, and within 40 minutes, the Rawalpindi was a blazing wreck, sinking with 238 of her crew. The mission was a success, but it highlighted the ever-present danger of the Royal Navy. The British home fleet had scrambled to intercept, and the German ships were forced to use their superior speed and foul weather to slip back to port. The real test, however, would come in the spring of 1940, with Operation Cerberus, the audacious and risky German invasion of Norway. Gneisenau and Scharnhorst were assigned as the heavy covering force for the troops landing at Narvik and Trondheim. On April 7, the fleet sailed. 2 days later, in the midst of a howling gale and heavy snow squalls off the Lofoten Islands, Gneisenau's lookouts spotted a shadow in the gloom. It was the British battlecruiser HMS Renown. The two forces, well matched in firepower and speed, opened fire on each other at a range of about 9 miles, 14 kilometers. Shells screamed through the storm. Renown scored the first hits, knocking out Gneisenau's main gunnery director and shattering the barrels of her rear turret. Gneisenau's gunners fired back, landing 2 shells on the British ship that, fortunately for her crew, failed to explode. But the German ship had taken a beating. Her forward turret was jammed by the violent seas and the shock of her own guns firing. With her gunnery control crippled, the German commander, Admiral Günther Lütjens, made the sensible decision to use his ship's superior speed to disengage and escape into a squall. It was an inconclusive but damaging encounter. After quick repairs, Gneisenau was back at sea in June 1940, embarking on the operation that would cement her fearsome reputation. In a mission codenamed Operation Juno, the two sister ships were sent to attack British supply lines to the Norwegian campaign. On the morning of June 8, their lookout spotted a plume of smoke on the horizon. It was the 22,500-ton British aircraft carrier HMS Glorious, sailing home with her 2 escorting destroyers, HMS Acasta and HMS Ardent. In a shocking state of unreadiness, Glorious was not flying any combat air patrol and had no aircraft ready on her deck. The German battleships closed the distance with terrifying speed. At 16:32, Scharnhorst opened fire, followed shortly by Gneisenau. At a range of over 15 miles, 24 kilometers, the third salvo from Scharnhorst struck the carrier's flight deck, starting a massive fire. Gneisenau's 11-inch shells then began to rain down on the stricken vessel. The 2 British destroyers acted with incredible bravery, charging the German giants in a suicidal attempt to protect their carrier. They laid smoke screens and fired torpedoes. HMS Ardent fought valiantly before being smothered by secondary battery fire from the battleships and sinking. HMS Acasta, however, scored a crucial hit. One of her torpedoes slammed into Scharnhorst's hull, tearing a large hole and forcing her to reduce speed. But it was not enough to save Glorious. Battered by shell fire and consumed by flames, the British carrier rolled over and sank. Shortly after, the heroic Acasta followed her to the bottom. In less than 2 hours, the Germans had sunk an aircraft carrier and 2 destroyers. It was a stunning tactical victory, but it came at a cost. The torpedo damage to Scharnhorst forced the German squadron back to port, and on its return journey, Gneisenau was herself torpedoed by the British submarine HMS Clyde, suffering significant damage to her bow. The first year of the war had been a whirlwind of action, but Gneisenau's most successful operation was yet to come. After months of repairs in early 1941, she and Scharnhorst slipped through the Denmark Strait and into the vast hunting ground of the North Atlantic. This was Operation Berlin, a 2-month-long commerce raid that would spread panic throughout the Allied convoy system. Under the command of Admiral Lutyens, once again, their orders were clear: cause maximum disruption to British shipping, but avoid engaging enemy capital ships at all costs. Their speed was their shield. For 60 days they roamed the Atlantic almost at will. On February 8, they sighted convoy HX-106, but its escort included the old battleship HMS Glorious. Adhering to his orders, Lutyens refused to give battle and slipped away. 2 weeks later, they found what they were looking for: unescorted shipping. They descended upon a group of westbound tankers and sank them. Then, on March 15 and 16, they struck the jackpot. They intercepted scattered ships from a dispersed convoy, sinking or capturing 16 vessels. It was a turkey shoot. The two battleships were a perfect commerce raiding team, using their float planes to scout for targets and their superior speed to pounce on them before an escort could intervene. By the time they steamed into the occupied French port of Brest on March 22, 1941, Operation Berlin had been an overwhelming success. Together, the two ships had sunk or captured 22 ships, totaling over 115,000 gross registered tons. They had tied up huge elements of the Royal Navy in a frantic cat-and-mouse chase, and had proven that surface raiders could still be a decisive strategic weapon. But their new home in Brest was a gilded cage. Situated on the French Atlantic coast, it was well within the range of the Royal Air Force, AF. The British began a relentless bombing campaign against the port, determined to neutralize the threat. For 10 months, Gneisenau was a prisoner, subjected to near-daily air raids. In an attack on April 6, 1941, a single armor-piercing bomb struck the ship, causing significant damage. Days later, while undergoing repairs, she was hit by a torpedo, dropped by a Beaufort torpedo bomber from RAF Coastal Command, causing more extensive flooding. The ship was trapped. The constant threat of air attack made any further Atlantic operations impossible. By early 1942, Hitler had had enough. He ordered the ships to return to Germany, not by slipping back through the northern passages, but by taking the shortest, most direct, and most dangerous route imaginable. Straight through the Strait of Dover and up the English Channel. The plan was codenamed Operation Cerberus. To the British, it seemed insane. A daylight dash through the most heavily defended waterway in the world was considered suicide. But the Germans planned it with meticulous care. They assembled a massive air umbrella of over 250 Luftwaffe fighters to protect the ships. Flotillas of destroyers, torpedo boats, and minesweepers would form a tight screen around them. On the night of February 11, 1942, Gneisenau, Scharnhorst, and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen slipped their moorings and headed for the Channel. The British were caught completely by surprise. Their radar was being jammed, their patrols failed to spot the fleet, and a series of communication blunders meant that by the time the Admiralty in London realized what was happening, the German ships were already off the coast of France. What followed was a day of frantic and desperate British attacks. Motor torpedo boats darted out to launch their torpedoes, only to be driven off by the German escorts. 6 obsolete swordfish torpedo bombers, with almost no fighter cover, went in with immense courage. All 6 were shot down. Squadrons of RAF bombers and fighters threw themselves at the fleet, but they were met by the wall of German fighters and the ship's own formidable anti-aircraft fire. It was chaos, but the German formation held. Gneisenau steamed on, her guns blazing at aircraft and surface targets. She had made it through the Strait of Dover. It was a stunning operational success and a source of deep humiliation for the British. But Gneisenau's luck was about to run out. As she steamed off the Dutch island of Terschelling, she struck a magnetic mine. The explosion rocked the ship, causing minor flooding and knocking out her turbines for a short time. She was damaged, but not critically. She managed to get underway again and, along with Prince Eugen, limped into the German port of Brunsbüttel. Scharnhorst, having also hit 2 mines, would arrive later. The Channel dash was over. It was a tactical victory, but in reality, it was a strategic withdrawal. The Atlantic raiders had been forced back to their kennel. Gneisenau was moved to Kiel to be repaired in a floating dry dock at her old home, the Deutsche Werke shipyard. She was seemingly safe, her crew no doubt relieved to be back in a German port after the ordeal in the Channel. The damage from the mine was not severe, and she was expected to be back in service relatively quickly. But the RAF was not finished with her. On the night of February 26, 1942, just 2 weeks after her triumphant return, Bomber Command launched a heavy raid on Kiel. As the sirens wailed, the skeleton crew on board Gneisenau prepared for the worst. During the raid, the ship took a devastating hit. A single 1,000-pound, 450-kilogram, armor-piercing bomb struck the forecastle, just in front of the forward turret, Anton. It sliced through the armored deck and detonated in the forward ammunition storeroom. The result was a cataclysm. A massive, violent explosion ripped through the front of the ship. A column of brilliant orange flame erupted from the bow, and the entire forward main battery turret, weighing over 1,500 tons, was lifted from its mounting. The internal blast was so powerful it blew the turret's armored roof clean off. The heat from the ensuing fire was so intense it cooked off the remaining shells and propellant charges, and the steel of the turret barbette and the surrounding structure glowed red and melted. The entire bow section from the forward turret to the stem was utterly destroyed, burned out, and mangled. In that one fiery moment, 112 sailors were killed. Gneisenau's combat career was over. It had not ended in a glorious battle against the home fleet, but in a helpless, fiery inferno while tied up in a dock. The damage was catastrophic, but not, in the eyes of the Kriegsmarine, fatal. A plan was formulated. The ship would be towed east, away from the RAF's reach, to the port of Gotenhafen, which is now Gdynia in Poland. There she would undergo extensive repairs. But the plan was even more ambitious than that. This was the opportunity to finally carry out the upgrade she was designed for from the very beginning. The 3 damaged 28.3-centimeter triple turrets would be removed, and they would be replaced by 3 new twin turrets housing the powerful 38-centimeter guns, the same type used on the battleship Bismarck. Her bow would be rebuilt and lengthened to improve her seakeeping. She would emerge as one of the most powerful warships afloat. In April 1942, the crippled battleship was decommissioned and made the slow journey to Gotenhafen. Work began to dismantle the wrecked bow and remove the damaged turrets. The new 38-centimeter guns and their turrets were already being constructed. For a while, it seemed like Gneisenau might be reborn. But the tide of the war was turning against Germany. In December 1942, the disastrous Battle of the Barents Sea saw German surface forces driven off by a much weaker British cruiser escort. An enraged Hitler lost all faith in his capital ships, famously ordering that the entire surface fleet be scrapped and their guns used for coastal defenses. Grand Admiral Raeder resigned in protest, and his successor, Karl Dönitz, the architect of the U-boat fleet, managed to talk Hitler out of the order. But the damage was done. All work on new surface ships and major conversions was halted. The resources were needed elsewhere, primarily for the U-boat war. So the work on Gneisenau stopped. She lay in Gotenhafen, a silent, half-dismantled ghost. Her guns were removed and sent to be used as coastal batteries in Norway and Denmark. For 2 years she sat there, a sad monument to broken ambitions. By early 1945, the Soviet army was closing in on the port. There was no escape for the derelict hulk. On March 27, 1945, the once proud battleship was towed to the harbor entrance and scuttled, her hull settling on the bottom to serve as one final, ignominious block ship. After the war, the Polish government had her raised and broken up for scrap, a process that was completed by 1951. The story of the Gneisenau is one of immense promise and ultimate tragedy. She was a superb fighting ship, brilliantly handled by her crews in some of the most daring naval operations of World War II. For a brief, glorious period, she and her sister were the masters of the Atlantic, a threat that haunted the British Admiralty day and night. but she was a ship defined by the promise of what she could have been. The question will forever linger. What if she had been fitted with her 15-inch guns from the start? Or what if that single bomb in Kiel had missed? She might have become one of history's most formidable warships. Instead, her career was cut short, leaving behind a legacy of spectacular success, a daring escape, and a fiery, inglorious end. The Gneisenau reminds us that in war, a weapon's potential is often as important as its reality, and sometimes the difference between legend and obscurity can be a single unlucky moment. What other piece of military hardware had its fate sealed by a similar what-if moment in history? We read every comment and are always looking for the next mission briefing from you, our command staff. Let us know what story we should investigate next. And if you enjoy diving into the history of these incredible machines of war, make sure you are subscribed and have hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming out of the shipyard next.